Toby Adeyemi, if that's not my son running from homework, I'm buying this whole parking lot ice cream. I wasn't running, Mummy. I was strategically retreating, Toby shouted while running to his mother. His mother high-fived him when he came close, then stole the fry right out of his hand. That's mine! Was. They burst out laughing so hard she had to lean on the car. Coa had never seen anything like it. The next day, they argued loudly about music. The day after that, they competed to see who could reach the car first. On Thursday, Toby's mother chased him around the parking lot because he had hidden vegetables in his school bag. Every day, they laughed. Every day, Coa watched. Coa, standing exactly 3 feet from the gate, watched the way she'd watched every day for 3 weeks. Because in her world, fathers didn't race their kids. Mothers didn't steal your fries and dare you to be mad. Nobody laughed that loud over nothing. Today her driver was late. So was Toby's mum, which meant, for the first time in 3 weeks, Toby was standing alone. Coa walked straight up to him. Toby is shocked because she has never voluntarily spoken to him before. Then she says in her usual calm, formal voice, "I like your mummy," she said. "Can she be my mummy too?" Toby froze, studied her for 5 whole seconds like she was a math problem he hadn't been warned about, then says, Another pause. Temporary adoption is possible. Coa blinks. Temporary adoption? Yes. Full adoption requires paperwork. Coa considers this. I understand. Toby nods wisely. Then he says, "Also, you look lonely," he said slowly, like he was still deciding it as the words came out. "Congratulations. You have been adopted." This was, Toby would later admit, hilarious, mostly because he had decided the entire thing on his own, with no committee, no vote, and no idea what he was about to walk into. That's when his mother's car pulled up. Evelyn stepped out, sunglasses pushed into her hair, and immediately clocked the small, rigid stranger, standing way too close to her son for this to be nothing. "Mum, this is Coa," Toby announced, proud as a man presenting a trophy. "She wants you to be her mum." "I already adopted her." Evelyn didn't blink, didn't ask a single follow-up question. She simply crouched down to Coa's eye level. Like this happened every Tuesday. "Wonderful," she said. "I'm Evelyn. Welcome to the family. High five?" Coa stared at the raised palm, like it was a complicated math problem. 1 second. 2, 3, slap. The most awkward high five ever performed by a human child. Toby gasped, scandalized. "Mom, you can't just scare her on the first day." Evelyn laughed. Warm, unbothered, completely real. Coa, privately, decided she liked that sound. That was when the black car arrived. Si-Juan stepped out expecting to find his daughter exactly where he always found her. Alone, quiet, reading, waiting. Instead, he found his daughter standing between 2 strangers, a boy who hadn't stopped talking, and a woman who looked entirely too pleased with herself. Evelyn walked over and says cheerfully, "Hello, I'm Evelyn. I've temporarily adopted your daughter." Si-Juan went still. "I'm sorry." "Don't worry," she said, perfectly serious. "We feed children." He had no idea if she was joking. Before he could ask, she'd already pressed a card into his hand. "Saturday. Bring Coa over." Toby says she needs fun, and he's rarely wrong about that. Si-Juan looked down at his daughter. "I would like to attend," Coa said quietly. It was, by his count, the longest sentence she'd spoken without being asked a question in months. He looked at the card, looked at her face. "Yes," he said. "If you're already rooting for this family, like the video and subscribe." Saturday is about to get very loud. Saturday arrived, and it announced itself before Si-Juan had even parked the car. Music was coming through the windows of the house. Not background music, music with opinions. Bass rattling faintly against the glass. Through the window, he could see Evelyn dancing while stirring a pot. Badly. Both the dancing and possibly the stirring. A half-finished board game sat abandoned on the porch steps, pieces scattered like there'd been a small war, and nobody had claimed victory. So unbuckled her seatbelt with her usual precision, then paused, hand still on the buckle, studying the house like she was assessing a structural risk. "Father," she said, "you do not have to come inside if it is too loud for you." "I'm coming inside," Si Juan said, in the tone of a man entering a building he suspected was not up to code, but intended to inspect personally. "You are allowed to wait in the car. I would not think less of you." "Noted," he said, and got out of the car anyway. The door flew open before either of them had reached it. "You're here!" Toby yelled, then spun back into the house at full volume. "Mom! The lonely ones are here!" "Toby!" Everlynn's voice sailed out from the kitchen, somehow both exasperated and completely unsurprised, like this was a correction she'd made roughly 400 times before. "What did I say about calling people that to their faces? You said don't do it meanly. I said it nicely. Listen to my tone. It was very warm." That was not the part of the sentence that was the problem, Toby. Then what was? The sentence itself. "I don't understand the distinction." "You will when you're older." Si Juan stood in the doorway, absorbing the sheer audacity of the house. The volume of it, the smell of two things cooking at once, one of which was faintly smoking in a way Everlyn seemed to regard as well within acceptable range. He had walked into boardrooms with less tension in the air. "Welcome," Toby announced, sweeping an arm across the chaos like he was unveiling a palace to visiting dignitaries. "Our family has exactly one rule." Seo-ah, sensing the presence of actual structure at last, straightened with real interest. This, finally, was something she understood. "What is the rule?" "Don't set the house on fire." A pause. "That is the only rule?" Seo-ah asked, faintly scandalized, as though he'd just told her the house had no walls. "That's the only one that matters. Everything else is negotiable." "Negotiable with whom?" "Me, mostly. Sometimes Mum, if she's not busy." "I am always busy," Everlyn called from the kitchen, without turning around. "See, that's the problem with the system," Toby said to Seo-ah, entirely serious. "The negotiator is rarely available." Seo-ah considered this a deeply unsatisfying answer, the kind of answer that raised more questions than it settled, and reached for the one tool she trusted in moments like this. She spotted a notepad on the counter, and a pen beside it, and picked both up with the seriousness of a surgeon selecting an instrument for a delicate procedure. "What's that?" Toby asked, peering over her shoulder, already suspicious. "A schedule," she said. And there was real pride in it. The pride of someone finally doing something they were good at. For fun. 10 o'clock, arrival activities. 10:30, snack. 11 o'clock, supervised play. 11:45, quiet time. Toby read it, then read it again, slower, the way a judge might reread a confession before deciding the sentence. Seo-ah. "Yes? We're already in quiet time." Seo-ah blinked, genuinely startled, and checked her watch as though it might confirm this. "We are? No." He took the notepad gently from her hands, almost tender about it, like he was retrieving something from a child who didn't yet understand it could hurt them. "See? The schedule already lied to you. Within the first 2 minutes. It can't be trusted." "That is not how schedules work. A schedule cannot lie. It is simply a document. This one's a liar. I don't make the rules." "Well, I do make the rules. We covered that. But this isn't one of them. You cannot simply declare a document dishonest because it is inconvenient to you." "I'm not declaring it dishonest because it's inconvenient. I'm declaring it dishonest because it said quiet time was at 11:45, and it is currently not 11:45, and yet somehow we are already being quiet, discussing quiet time, which means the concept of quiet time has already occurred outside its allotted slot, which means the schedule is wrong, which means you are talking a great deal for someone arguing in favor of quiet. Toby paused, considered this. That's fair, actually, and With the flourish of a man closing an argument he'd already decided to win regardless of the facts, he dropped the notepad in the kitchen bin. Toby, you'll thank me later. I will not. You'll thank me eventually, possibly next year. I'm playing a long game here. He reached for her hand. Seo-ah pulled hers back immediately, tucking it against her side like it had been threatened. I have not agreed to this. Agreed to what? Whatever it is you are about to make me do. I'm not making you do anything. I am simply going to take you by the hand, walk you in a specific direction, and let fate handle the rest. That is the same thing as making me do it. It's really not. Fate is involved now. That changes everything. Legally. We are not discussing anything legal. We could be. I don't know your life. Despite herself, Seo-ah felt the corner of her mouth twitch and crushed it immediately, the way she crushed most things that threatened to show on her face. I would like to sit on the sofa, she announced, with dignity, and observe from a safe distance. The sofa is now part of the fort. There is no sofa anymore. There is only fort. That is my father's coat you have used as a wall. He'll never know. He is standing directly behind you. Si Huan, in fact, was standing directly behind him, coat draped somewhere inside a structure of cushions that should not, by any law of physics Seo-ah was aware of, still be standing. He made no move whatsoever to reclaim it. He found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he didn't especially want to. Seo-ah was towed toward the fort anyway, protesting the entire distance. This is unnecessary. I was perfectly comfortable where I was. There is a pillow now touching my face, and I did not consent to this specific pillow. While Toby narrated his own heroism the whole way in, entirely unbothered by her resistance, treating it more like weather than an objection. You'll like it once you're inside. I do not believe that. Nobody believes it until they're inside. That's the whole trick of it. That sounds like something someone says right before something goes wrong. Statistically, sometimes things do go wrong, but usually it's fun wrong, not actually wrong. Those seem difficult to tell apart in advance. You'll develop an instinct for it. Give it time. He pulled back a flap of blanket and gestured her inside with the ceremony of a man presenting a throne room. Seo-ah ducked in, still radiating disapproval with her whole posture, arms crossed, spine as straight as the low ceiling of cushions would allow. I am only sitting here to humor you, she informed him. Noted and irrelevant. I would like that on the record. There is no record. This is a fort. Forts don't keep minutes. That seems like a significant oversight in your governance. We'll bring it up at the next rule meeting, which doesn't exist, which is also an oversight probably. Mid-argument, reaching to adjust a cushion that had drifted out of position, Toby's elbow slipped into a gap between two pillows, and he yelped, sudden and undignified, his voice cracking 2 octaves higher than he intended. Seo-ah laughed, not a polite laugh, not the small, contained sound she allowed herself in public. A real, startled, entirely undignified laugh that burst out of her before she had any say in the matter. Loud enough that she clapped a hand over her own mouth immediately afterward. Eyes wide, like she'd been caught committing a crime she hadn't known was illegal until she'd already done it. Toby went instantly, gleefully still, elbow forgotten. Wait. Do that again. No, you laughed. I did not. I heard it happen, with my own ears. Mum! She laughed. I heard it. I am aware of what occurred, Toby. I was present for the entire event. There is no need to provide a public announcement. There is every need! This is historic. Do it again. I will not be performing on command like some kind of... That's exactly the sentence a person who's about to do it again would say. It is not. It really is. I've heard this exact sentence before, right before someone did the thing again. You have not. I have. From you. 90 seconds ago. Functionally. Seo-ah opened her mouth to argue this point on principle, found she didn't actually have a rebuttal, and closed it again, which Toby took as a full and complete victory, punching the air once inside the cramped fort, and nearly bringing the whole structure down on both their heads. Out in the hallway, Si-hwan stood absolutely still, listening for that sound to happen again, the way a man might wait by a window for a rare bird to return to the same branch. He had not heard his daughter laugh like that in 8 years. He was not going to miss the second one, if there was going to be a second one. Evelyn appeared beside him without announcing herself, a dish towel slung over one shoulder, following his gaze toward the fort with an expression that suggested she already understood exactly what he was doing and had decided not to embarrass him about it. Yet, "First time?" she asked, quiet enough that it barely counted as a question at all. Si-hwan didn't answer immediately. He watched the fort a moment longer, as though answering too quickly might jinx something. "Yes," he admitted eventually, before he'd fully decided whether he wanted to say it out loud to a woman he'd met 4 days ago. "Good." Evelyn nodded, satisfied, like a diagnosis had just been confirmed. Someone needed to crack that shell eventually. Might as well be my son. He's very qualified. Extensive experience cracking things that shouldn't be cracked. Is that meant to reassure me? A little. It is not entirely succeeding. "Give it time," she said, echoing Toby without seeming to notice. And then, without any transition whatsoever, without lowering her voice even slightly, turned and bellowed toward the fort. "Toby, is that the lamp in there again? I can smell something warming up that shouldn't be warm. It's a low wattage situation. It's completely under control. Get the lamp out of the fort. You always ruin the best ideas right when they're getting good. The best ideas don't typically involve electricity inside a pile of blankets, Toby. That's not a personal failing of mine. That's just physics." There was a scuffle of movement, a muttered complaint, and a cord was hastily yanked from the wall. The fort survived the incident, mildly less illuminated but otherwise intact, and from inside it, Coa's voice emerged, oddly delighted. "Does this happen every time?" "Most times," Toby admitted. "Not every time. Sometimes it's the toaster." "The toaster is inside the fort?" "Not anymore. We learned." "I have several follow-up questions. I have several answers, none of which will reassure you." Later, once the last traces of smoke from what Toby had grandly billed as Snack Innovation Hour, an unlicensed and largely unsuccessful experiment involving marshmallows and, somehow, against several safety norms, the toaster, had cleared from the kitchen, Evelyn clapped her hands together and announced karaoke with the unshakable enthusiasm of a woman declaring a national holiday. "No," Si-hwan said, immediately and with total finality. "That's not actually how this works. I don't sing." "Everyone sings. Some people just sing badly. You'll fit right in with the rest of us. We have a proud tradition of it. I have a meeting Monday that requires—" "It's Saturday, Si-hwan. I am aware of the day." "Then you're aware there's no meeting currently happening that could possibly save you from this." "There could be a call." "Is there a call?" A pause. "No." "Then we've established there's nothing standing between you and this microphone, except your own pride, which, respectfully, nobody in this house is going to protect on your behalf." Toby appeared at his elbow, having produced a microphone from somewhere. Plastic, faintly chewed at one end, clearly a veteran of many previous performances, and held it out with the gravity of a man serving legal papers he'd been personally deputized to deliver. "You don't have a choice in this," he said solemnly. "This is a sanctioned event. I did not sanction anything. You walked into the house. That's consent. That is not how consent works, legally or otherwise. It's exactly how it works in this house. We have our own laws here. This house appears to have remarkably few laws that survive close examination. We have one law and it's an excellent law, and nobody's died yet, so I'd call that a working system." Si-hwan accepted the microphone the way one might accept a small, unstable explosive, holding it slightly away from his body, as though distance might reduce the damage. He did not sing for the first song, which Toby performed with the unreasonable, full-bodied commitment of someone who genuinely believed a talent scout might be hiding in the curtains, while Evelyn harmonized badly on purpose, just to watch her son lose the words entirely from laughing. "Coa," cross-legged on the floor with the fort's cushions still scattered around her like the aftermath of a small, cheerful disaster, watched her father with the focused attention of someone observing an experiment she expected to fail. "He is not going to do it," she told Toby quietly, during a lull between songs. "He's going to do it. He has never, in my entire life, done something he did not already plan to do. That's exactly the kind of man who cracks the hardest, once he cracks. Trust the process." I do not know what process you are referring to. Neither do I, really, but it's worked on everyone so far. Define everyone. You, this afternoon, in a fort. Sioa had, once again, no rebuttal prepared, and returned her attention to her father instead, watching him stand rigid against the wall, arms crossed, radiating the specific, particular discomfort of a man who had once negotiated a 9-figure acquisition without so much as loosening his tie, and was now, somehow, cornered in a living room by an 8-year-old holding a chewed plastic microphone. On the third song, Everlyn chose it herself this time, starting it low and unhurried, an old song, gentle, the kind that didn't ask anything difficult of anyone. Something in Si-Juan's face changed, just slightly. His mouth moved along with one line, barely audible, almost deniable if anyone had tried to call him on it. Toby gasped so hard he nearly dropped his own microphone entirely, spinning toward his mother with the wide, delighted eyes of a boy witnessing a natural phenomenon he'd only read about in books. "He's doing it. He's actually doing it. Mum, film this. This is a historic event. Future generations will want proof." "I am not," Si-Juan started, already knowing, even as the words left his mouth, that it was too late to fully deny it. And then Seoa laughed again, freer this time than the fort, unguarded, the second real laugh he'd heard out of her in one single afternoon, after 8 years of near silence, and whatever was left of his resistance simply gave out under the weight of it. He sang the next line properly, badly, openly, often at least 2 different directions at once, with cushion stuffing still visible in his hair, from the fort's earlier structural failure. "Told you," Toby said to Sioa, insufferably smug, not even bothering to look away from Si-Juan as he said it. "This proves nothing. It proves everything I said. It proves he was cornered by 2 people and a microphone. Cornered is just a fancy word for convinced. Those are not the same word. They're cousins." Sioa considered arguing the linguistic point further, decided it wasn't worth the effort, and instead allowed herself, just for a moment, to simply watch her father sing badly in a stranger's living room and feel something she didn't immediately have a word for. That night, in the car, she sat the way she always sat, spine straight, hands folded neatly in her lap, but her cheeks were still faintly pink from laughing, and the quiet that filled the car on the drive home didn't feel like the usual quiet. It felt full, the particular kind of quiet that settles into a room after good company has just left it. "Father." "Yes? May we return next week?" Si-Juan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, 8 years old, asking permission again, the way she always did. But her voice wasn't careful this time. It was plain, open, hopeful in a way that didn't try to hide itself. The way a child's voice was supposed to sound, and so rarely did, in his house. "Yes," he said. "No, we'll see. Just yes." Outside, the streetlights slid past in long, unbroken lines, and for once, the silence between them didn't feel like something either of them was quietly enduring, until it was over. Monday morning, the mansion was exactly as quiet as it had been every morning for 8 years, except now the quiet had a shape Si-Juan hadn't noticed before. It sat in the hallways. It sat on the stairs. It sat, especially, in the enormous dining room where Seoa ate breakfast alone at a table built for 12, following a placemat schedule that told her, in small printed script, what time to lift her spoon. He noticed it because Toby had asked, the week before, completely without malice, "Does anyone else live in your house, or is it just you and the ghosts?" Si-Juan had laughed it off at the time. He was not laughing it off now, standing in the doorway of his own dining room, watching his daughter eat in total silence at 7:14 exactly, the way she always had, the way he had never once questioned, until a loud 8-year-old boy had made it sound absurd out loud. He said nothing about it. He simply mentioned, over the following week, that Toby and his mother were welcome to visit, if Coa wished it. Coa wished it enormously, though she phrased the request as, "It would be logistically convenient if they visited us, given that we visited them last," which was, Si Juan had come to learn, exactly how his daughter said please. So the following Saturday, a car that was decidedly less sleek and considerably louder pulled into the mansion's circular driveway, and Toby Adeyemi stepped out of it like a man, arriving to inspect a crime scene. He looked up, and up, and up. "Okay," he said slowly, to no one in particular. "This is a lot of house." "It is adequate," Coa said, appearing at the top of the front steps in a dress that looked pressed by professionals, hands folded in front of her exactly the way they'd been folded in the parking lot 3 weeks ago, before any of this had started. "Adequate." "Right." Toby turned in a slow circle, taking in the manicured hedges, the fountain that appeared to serve no purpose except existing beautifully, the sheer scale of the place. "Coa, does anyone here ever, yell, for fun? Yell for what reason? Any reason, just to hear it happen? That would be highly irregular." "That's what I thought." Toby nodded gravely, as though a diagnosis had just been confirmed, and walked inside. The silence hit him immediately. Not the absence of sound exactly, but a kind of managed quiet, the sort that came from somewhere very deliberate. A grandfather clock ticked in the front hall, and it was, as far as Toby could tell, the single loudest thing happening in the entire building. He stopped walking, looked up at it. "That clock," he said, "sounds terrified. It is a clock. It does not have feelings. Everything in this house sounds like it's afraid to make noise, Coa, even the clock. And clocks are supposed to be confident. That's their whole job, ticking with confidence. And this one sounds like it's apologizing every second." Coa considered the clock. She had genuinely never thought about it as having a tone before. "I do not know how to respond to that." "You don't have to. I'm just diagnosing the house. Give me a minute. I'm building a full picture." Evelyn, trailing in behind them with a tote bag over one shoulder, she'd brought snacks, because apparently that was simply what she did, wherever she went, uninvited or not, took in the marble floors and the twin staircases, and the sheer, echoing emptiness of it all, and said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, mostly to herself, "Lord, no wonder." Si Juan appeared from the study to greet them, and found Toby standing in the middle of his front hall, hands on his hips, surveying the space like a general assessing a battlefield he intended to win. "Mr. Cha," Toby said solemnly, "this house needs help." "Excuse me? I don't say this to be rude. I say this out of concern. This house needs help, sir. It's very beautiful. It's also very sad. Those can both be true at the same time." Si Juan opened his mouth to object, found he genuinely didn't have an objection ready, and closed it again. "I'm going to fix it," Toby announced, already rolling up his sleeves like a man preparing for surgery. "Today. This is Operation Save COA. It has been approved by exactly one person, which is me, but I'm confident the vote would have passed anyway." "I did not agree to any operation," Seo said. "You don't have to agree. Fate's involved again. We covered this. We did not cover anything. You simply stated it and moved on, before I could respond. That's how covering works." Within 20 minutes, the front hall had been transformed into what Toby called a treasure hunt zone, which mostly meant he had hidden small paper clues under sofa cushions, behind the base of a marble statue, and, to the visible horror of the house staff, inside a vase that had, Si Juan was fairly certain, cost more than most cars. "You cannot put a clue in the Ming vase," Soa hissed, chasing him across the hall at a speed she had never previously been observed moving at. "It's not the real Ming vase, is it?" "I do not know which vase is real, Toby. That is not information I have ever needed." then it's fine. If neither of us knows, it's fine. That's basic logic. That is not basic logic. That is the opposite of basic logic. She was laughing as she said it, though. The same startled, unguarded laugh from the fort, except this time it came faster, easier, like something that had already learned the way out. The staff, initially frozen in the doorways, unsure whether to intervene in whatever was happening to the house they'd spent years keeping silent and immaculate, watched COA run, actually run, arms pumping, hair coming loose from its careful part, and something in each of them seemed to soften at once. One of the younger maids, without any real decision behind it, simply handed COA a clue she'd noticed sticking out from under a cabinet and said nothing to anyone about it. By the time Si-Huan came looking for his daughter 20 minutes later, he found this. 2 members of his household staff crouched behind a sofa, badly hiding, muffling their own laughter with their hands. Toby, standing on the second step of the grand staircase, directing the operation like a small, deeply invested general, and his daughter, sprinting full tilt across marble floors that had never once, in 8 years, heard the sound of running feet. He stood in the doorway and did not move. He did not call out. He did not remind anyone of the vase, real or otherwise. He simply watched his daughter run and laugh in his own house, and felt something in his chest that he did not have immediate words for. Something that sat somewhere between grief and gratitude. For all the years this hadn't happened and all the years, apparently, it still could. Evelyn found him there, a moment later, arms crossed, saying nothing, and followed his gaze. "You're doing the thing again," she said. "What thing?" "The quiet staring thing. You did it at my house too. During the fort. I was simply observing." "Sure you were." She smiled, but there was something gentler underneath the teasing this time. "It's good for you, you know. Watching this. Might as well let yourself enjoy it instead of just witnessing it from the doorway like a security camera. I don't know how to do the other thing. Nobody does, at first. You just have to actually walk into the room." Si-Huan looked at her for a moment longer than the conversation strictly required, and then, without fully deciding to, walked into the room. If you felt that moment, a father finally letting himself walk into his own daughter's joy, let us know in the comments. And if this story is healing something in you too, don't forget to like and subscribe. Dinner that evening was, by any measure COA had ever known, chaos. Toby had appointed himself head of entertainment and insisted on narrating each course like a sports commentator. Evelyn had somehow ended up cooking in Si-Huan's enormous, previously ornamental kitchen, moving through it with the easy confidence of someone who had never once considered a kitchen intimidating, chef's staff watching her with a mixture of alarm and reluctant admiration. "Mr. Cha," Toby said, halfway through the meal, entirely without warning, the way he said most important things. "Why do you always look sad?" The table went quiet. Even the clock, somewhere in the hall, seemed to hold its tick. "I don't look sad," Si-Huan said carefully. "You do, though. Even when you're not sad, you look like you're about to be sad. It's like your face is on standby for it." "Toby," Evelyn said warningly, from the stove. "I'm not being mean. I'm being accurate. There's a difference. You said that about the schedule joke too. And it wasn't true then either. It was slightly true." Si-Huan set down his fork. He had endured board meetings with less scrutiny than this 8-year-old was currently subjecting him to, and found, oddly, that he didn't want to deflect it the way he would have deflected it from an adult. "I have had reasons to be serious," he said, which was as close to an honest answer as he generally allowed himself. "Everyone has reasons," Toby said, unbothered. "That doesn't mean you have to keep being sad forever, though. That seems like a long time to commit to one feeling. It is not a choice one simply makes. I think it kind of is, actually." Toby considered this with the seriousness of a much older person briefly occupying a child's body. "You need adoption too." Si-Huan blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Adoption. Like COA. You need it too. You're one of the lonely ones. I just hadn't gotten around to you yet, because COA was first in line." "Toby," Evelyn's voice came sharp and immediate from the stove. though she was visibly fighting a smile. You cannot keep adopting people. This is not a program you run. You cannot simply adopt every sad person you encounter. This one's different, Mum. He's the exception. They're always the exception with you. Because they're always exceptional. That's not my fault. That's just who I keep meeting. Sihwan sat very still, unsure whether he was supposed to laugh or object, caught somewhere between the two and landing, finally, on something quieter than either. A kind of stillness that wasn't discomfort, for once, but something closer to being truly seen, by someone with absolutely no stake in flattering him. I accept, he heard himself say. The table went silent again, this time in surprise. Accept what? Toby asked. The adoption. If it is being offered. Toby's face broke into the widest grin of the entire evening, delighted beyond all measure, like he'd just closed the single best deal of his young career. See, Mum? Exception. I told you. This does not set a precedent, Evelyn said, pointing her spoon at her son, though she was laughing now too, unable to hold the sternness together any longer. It absolutely sets a precedent. It does not. Every great tradition starts with a precedent, Mum. That's literally how traditions work. COA. Watching her father accept an 8-year-old's offer of adoption with the same gravity he brought to signing corporate contracts, found herself laughing again. The third time that day, easier now than the first, like a muscle finally remembering what it was for. You are both ridiculous, she informed the table. We know, Toby said, entirely without shame. It's part of the package. Should have read the terms before you asked to join. I did not read any terms. Nobody ever does. That's how we get everyone. Later, once dinner had dissolved into a card game Toby had invented on the spot, with rules that changed depending on whether he was winning, Evelyn found herself alone with Sihwan on the terrace, both of them nursing cups of tea neither had gotten around to drinking, the sound of the children's argument drifting faintly through the open doors behind them. Can I ask you something? Sihwan said, after a silence that had gone on long enough to feel intentional rather than awkward. You can ask. No promises on the answer. How do you do it? All of it. The noise, the mess, He gestured vaguely toward the house, toward the sound of Toby's voice rising in triumphant protest over some card he'd apparently played illegally. The joy. It seems to come to you without any effort at all. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, turning her cup slowly in her hands. It's not without effort, she said finally. I just decided, a long time ago, which effort I was going to spend it on. Sihwan waited. He had learned, over these few weeks, that she generally finished a thought if you simply gave her room to. Toby's father died when Toby was 4 months old, she said, plainly, without any visible need for sympathy in the telling of it. Car accident. Very sudden. One day he was there, complaining about my cooking, and the next day he wasn't, and I had a 4-month-old baby, and a house that was suddenly far too quiet, much like yours. I didn't know that. Most people don't. I don't lead with it. She smiled, faint but real. I had a choice, back then, that I don't think anyone tells you that you're going to have to make. I could let the grief become the air in the house, let Toby grow up breathing it in every single day, without ever choosing it himself. Or I could grieve on my own time, privately, and give him a house that laughed, even when I didn't feel like laughing that particular day. That sounds extraordinarily difficult. It was. It still is, some days. But I didn't want my son's whole childhood to be a memorial to something he never even got to meet. His father deserved better than that, and so did he. She looked toward the terrace doors, toward the sound of Toby still relitigating the card game with Coa, who was now laughing too hard to properly argue back. Grief doesn't ask permission to show up, but you get to decide how loud you let it be in the house, most days. That part, at least, is yours. Sihwan sat with that for a long moment, watching the same doorway she was watching, thinking of 8 years of a house that had let its grief be the loudest thing in every room, with no one ever having chosen it that way on purpose. It had simply happened, the way water finds the lowest point, and he had never once thought to redirect it. I don't know how to do what you did, he admitted quietly. You already started, Everlyn said. You walked into the room today. That's most of it, actually. The rest is just doing it again tomorrow. From inside, Toby's voice rose in outrage. That is not a legal move, COA. You cannot simply invent a rule mid-game. You invented the entire game mid-game, Toby. I am simply following your own precedent. That's different. It is the same thing you did to me regarding the schedule. A pause. Then, grudgingly, that's fair, actually. Everlyn laughed, the sound carrying easily out into the evening air. And Sihuan found himself laughing too, quietly, almost without noticing he'd started. The birth certificates came up because of a school project. Of all things, one of those assignments designed by a teacher who had clearly never considered what it might unearth. Family Heritage Week, Toby announced, dropping his backpack on the floor of the mansion's study, with the particular disgust reserved for homework that interfered with more important things. Like the ongoing card game rivalry, he and Seo-ah had somehow sustained for 3 straight weekends. We have to bring our birth certificates. For a poster, about where we're from. That seems needlessly bureaucratic for 8-year-olds, Seo-ah said, already retrieving a folder from a drawer with the efficiency of someone who kept her own documents in perfect order. Because of course she did. I know. I asked the teacher why we couldn't just say where we're from out loud, and she said that wasn't rigorous enough. It is a reasonable request. Documentation matters. You would say that. You probably have your own birth certificate laminated. It is not laminated. It is in a protective sleeve. Same thing. It is factually not the same thing. A sleeve is removable and lamination is. Just show me the paper, Seo-ah. She produced it. He produced his, slightly crumpled from the bottom of his backpack, next to what appeared to be a fossilized granola bar. They laid both documents side by side on the study floor, mostly out of boredom, mostly because neither of them had anything better to do, until Everlyn finished her tea with Sihuan on the terrace. Toby read his own first, out of habit. Then he read hers. Then he read his again. Wait, what? Seo-ah, what's your birthday? She told him the date, slightly irritated at having to repeat information that was, quite literally, printed directly in front of him. Toby stared at his own certificate, then at hers, then back at his, like he was checking for a printing error. That's my birthday too. Seo-ah looked up properly for the first time. That is a coincidence. It's not just the day though. Look, hospital. Same hospital. She leaned over to check and went quiet in a way that wasn't her usual composed quiet. This was a different stillness, the kind that came from genuine surprise rather than practiced control. Same year, she said slowly, reading further down the page. Same everything. Toby sat back, stunned into something resembling awe. We were basically born in the same room. Probably, statistically. That does not necessarily follow from the same hospital and same date. It follows enough for me. He checked the time listed on his certificate, then hers. His grin, when it arrived, was enormous and entirely without mercy. I'm older, he announced. By what possible measure? By 5 minutes, Seo-ah. 5 minutes. It's right here. In writing. Government writing. 5 minutes is not a meaningful unit of seniority. It's 5 whole minutes worth of experience you don't have. That's 5 minutes I've been alive and you haven't. Anything could have happened in that time. I could have learned things. You were an infant. You learned nothing in those 5 minutes except, presumably, how to cry. Exactly. Foundational skill. You were still 5 minutes away from even starting to learn that. This is not a competition. It's absolutely a competition, and I've already won it. Respect your elder. You are not my elder. You are, at most, my extremely minor senior by a margin so small it barely qualifies as a unit of time. Respect. Your elder. I decline. You can't decline a fact, Seo-ah. That's not how facts work. You can decline the significance assigned to a fact, which is precisely what I am doing. That sounds like something someone who lost an argument says. That is not what is happening here. It's exactly what's happening here. This argument would resurface, in various forms, roughly 4 more times over the following week. During dinner, during the card game, once memorably in the middle of a treasure hunt when Toby paused mid-search specifically to remind her of his seniority, and Seo-ah would decline it every single time with the exact same flat, dignified refusal, which only seemed to delight Toby further, since as far as he was concerned, her refusing to acknowledge it was its own kind of victory lap. But underneath the argument, something else had quietly surfaced. The way something long submerged rises slowly enough that you don't notice it until it's already broken the surface. "We should celebrate together," Toby said, a few days later, entirely reasonably, as though this were the obvious next step and not a landmine. "Same birthday, joint party. It's basically required by law at this point." "We do not celebrate my birthday," Seo-ah said. She said it the way she said most difficult things, flatly, without inflection, the way you might report a fact about the weather. Toby, for once, did not immediately have a joke ready. "What do you mean you don't celebrate it?" "We do not celebrate it. There is no cake. There is no party. My father is generally not available that day." "Not available how?" Seo-ah considered the question the way she considered most things, carefully, weighing whether the answer was hers to give. "He is occupied with other matters," she said finally, which was not quite a lie, and not quite the truth, and was, Toby correctly sensed, as far as she was willing to go. He didn't push. This too surprised her. She had come to expect that Toby pushed at everything, prodded every closed door just to see what was behind it, but he simply nodded, filed it away somewhere, and let the subject drop for the rest of the afternoon. It was Evelyn who found out the rest of it, a week later, not through prying, but through the ordinary accident of being present when something slipped. She'd stopped by to drop off a birthday poster Toby had insisted on making. Glitter, glued-on photos, the words "birthday twins" across the top in the crookedest handwriting imaginable, and found Seo-ah alone in the mansion's enormous kitchen, sitting very still at the counter, staring at nothing in particular. "You all right, sweetheart?" "I am well," Seo-ah said, in the tone of someone who had said that exact sentence many times, without it being strictly accurate. Evelyn set the poster down and pulled out the stool beside her, not pushing, just present, the way she'd learned worked best, with children who'd spent their whole lives being asked to perform composure. "Toby told me you don't celebrate your birthday," she said gently, after a moment. "That true?" Seo-ah was quiet for a long time, long enough that Evelyn nearly changed the subject, ready to let it go the way her son had. "My mother died on the day I was born," Seo-ah said finally, very quietly, looking at her own hands rather than at Evelyn. "During the birth, my father does not, he finds the day difficult, so we do not mark it. It is simply a day like any other, except quieter than most." Evelyn's chest tightened in a way she didn't let show on her face, because she understood, immediately and completely, exactly what kind of quiet that must be, in a house that already specialized in quiet. "Every year?" she asked softly. "Every year. He is usually occupied elsewhere for most of the day. I do not ask where." "I believe I understand, without being told. And you've just never had a birthday. In 8 years. I have had 8 birthdays. I have simply never celebrated one." Evelyn reached over, slowly, giving Seo-ah every chance to pull away, and rested a hand gently over the girl's smaller one on the counter. "That's not fair to you," she said. "None of that is your fault, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong by being born." "I understand that logically," Seo-ah said, and for the first time in the entire conversation, her voice wavered, just slightly, just enough to be noticed. "But I do not think my father has ever fully believed it." "But not really. Not underneath." Evelyn sat with that for a long moment, watching this small, careful girl who scheduled her own fun and apologized for existing on the one day she was supposed to be celebrated, and felt something settle in her chest, quiet and absolute, like a decision arriving fully formed. "This has to change," she thought. "Both of them, not just her. If this hit you the way it hit us, stay with this family a little longer. Comment if you think Evelyn's about to change everything, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next." She didn't say anything to Si-hwan that same day. She thought about it for nearly a week, turning it over carefully, the way you turn over something fragile before deciding how to hold it. She finally raised it on the terrace again, their now familiar spot, 2 cups of tea going cold between them, while the children argued indoors about whose turn it was to shuffle. "Can I say something that might upset you?" Everlyn said, without her usual preamble of teasing. Si-hwan set down his cup. Something in her tone told him this wasn't going to be a joke about his singing. "Go ahead. Si-hoa told me about her birthday. About what day it is." "What happened?" Si-hwan went very still, the particular stillness of a man who had spent 8 years making sure a specific subject never came up in conversation, and had just discovered it had come up anyway, without his permission, in a kitchen he hadn't been standing in. "I see," he said, carefully neutral. "I'm not trying to intrude on something that isn't mine to intrude on," Everlyn said, "but I need to say this anyway, because I don't think anyone else is going to say it to you, and I think you need to hear it." He didn't stop her. That, in itself, was new. "Your wife gave Coa life," Everlyn said, gently, but without any softening of the actual point. "That's what that day is. That's what it's always been, underneath the part that hurts. I don't think, if she loved you both the way I imagined she did, that she would want her daughter spending every single birthday of her life, mourning instead of living. I don't think that's the gift she meant to leave behind." Si-hwan didn't answer right away. He looked out over the darkening garden, jaw tight, hands folded the exact same way his daughters always were, and Everlyn wondered, not for the first time, exactly where Coa had learned that particular habit. "I don't know how to separate the two things," he said finally, voice rough in a way she hadn't heard from him before. "The day she was born, the day I lost her mother. They are the same day. They have always been the same day. I don't know how to celebrate one without reliving the other." "I know," Everlyn said. "I'm not saying it's simple. I lost someone too, remember? I know exactly how heavy a single date can get, how it can swallow every other thing that's supposed to live inside it. How did you do it? Truly. Not the short version you gave me before." Everlyn was quiet for a moment, choosing her words the way she chose very little else in her life. Carefully, deliberately. "I decided that grief could have its hour," she said. "Its private hour. Whenever it needed one. On whatever day it decided to show up uninvited. But I wasn't going to let it have Toby's whole childhood. He didn't do anything wrong by being born either. None of them do. It's not fair to make the day they arrived into the day everything ends, every single year, for the rest of their lives." "She's never had a real birthday," Si-hwan said quietly, almost to himself. 8 years, and she's never had one. "I know. What kind of father does that make me?" "A grieving one," Everlyn said, firm, but not unkind. "Not a bad one. There's a difference, even if it doesn't feel like it from inside it. But she's 8, Si-hwan, not 80. There's still time to give her the first one." He sat with that for a long, long moment, the garden going properly dark around them, the sound of Toby's voice still rising faintly from indoors, arguing some new rule into existence. "Her birthday is in 10 days, he said finally. "I know," Everlyn said. "Toby's already started planning something. He calls it Operation Birthday. I'd apologize for him, but I've stopped apologizing for that particular impulse of his a long time ago." For the first time in the whole conversation, Si-hwan almost smiled. Of course he has a name for it. He has a name for everything. It's how he processes caring about people. Ridiculous operation names. Everlyn looked at him properly then, steady and warm. "Let him do this one, Si-hwan. Let both of them do it. I think it might do the two of you more good than either of you expects." He looked down at his hands, at the same folded posture his daughter had learned from watching him, and thought of 8 birthdays spent alone in a locked study, while his daughter sat somewhere in the house not asking questions she already understood the answers to. "All right," he said quietly. "Let them." Operation Birthday, as it turned out, had already been underway for 4 days before anyone officially approved it. which Toby considered a technicality rather than a problem. You can't plan a surprise party for someone and then ask their permission, he explained to Sioa, with the patience of a man laying out something obvious to someone slow to catch up. That defeats the whole purpose of the word surprise. It is my birthday. I feel I should have some say in it. You'll have say in it after. That's how surprises work. Full transparency, retroactively. That is not transparency at all. It's delayed transparency. Very fashionable. Big in Europe, probably. Seoa did not know how to argue with something so confidently invented, and so, for once, did not try. The 10 days passed strangely for her, a low hum of anticipation she didn't have a name for, since she had never once looked forward to this particular date in her entire life. Every year it had simply arrived, quiet and heavy, and left the same way. She caught her father, twice, standing outside her door in the evenings as though he meant to say something and then didn't. She didn't ask what. She had learned, a long time ago, not to ask him things he wasn't ready to answer. Evelyn came by more often that week than she ever had before, always with some flimsy excuse, a forgotten dish, a book Toby supposedly needed back urgently, that fooled absolutely no one, least of all Sioa, who began keeping a private mental tally of how many times flimsy excuse had become actual pattern. She said nothing about it. She found, to her own surprise, that she didn't mind. On the morning of the day itself, Sioa woke at her usual hour, out of habit more than intention, and lay very still in bed for a long moment, waiting for the familiar weight to settle over her chest, the way it always had on this date. It came, faint and old and known, an ache she recognized without needing to name it. But it didn't have the room to grow the way it usually did, because a moment later there was a knock at her door, entirely too energetic for the hour, and Toby's voice on the other side, badly attempting to whisper, and failing completely. So are you awake? I need you to be awake. This is time sensitive. It is 7:03 in the morning. Yes, and Operation Birthday begins at 7, so we're already 4 minutes behind schedule, which I know bothers you, so get up. You are using my own scheduling instincts against me. I'm using every tool available to me. Get up. She got up. What followed was, by any objective measure, chaos, but a specific, deliberate kind of chaos, one that had clearly been planned with more care than Toby liked to admit to. The mansion's usually silent halls were strung with paper streamers, in colors that clashed violently and beautifully with the marble. Someone, several someones, Sioa suspected, judging by the varying handwriting, had taped hand-drawn signs to nearly every wall, most of them featuring Toby's crooked lettering, and at least one featuring what appeared to be Everlin's far neater hand, correcting his spelling directly on the sign itself. The staff, who had spent 8 years mastering the art of moving through this house without making a sound, were openly setting up a table of food in the main hall, laughing with each other while they worked, as though the house itself had finally been given permission to be loud. And there, standing near the base of the grand staircase, was her father. He was not in his usual suit. He wore something plainer, something she had genuinely never seen on him before, and he was holding, with visible awkwardness, a small wrapped box that he clearly had no idea how to present gracefully. "Father," Seoa said, stopping short at the bottom of the stairs. "What is happening?" "It appears," Siwon said, with the careful, uncertain tone of a man attempting something entirely unfamiliar to him, "to be your birthday." Siwon said. Siwon felt something catch in her throat. "We do not celebrate my birthday." "I know," he said quietly. "I would like that to change today, if you'll allow it." She didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a long moment, really looked, the way she rarely allowed herself to, searching his face for whatever usually retreated behind it on this date every year, and found, for the first time in as long as she could remember, that it wasn't retreating at all. "I would allow it," she said finally, very quietly. Toby, sensing precisely the correct moment to detonate the emotional tension before it became unbearable, chose that exact instant to slide halfway down the staircase banister, yelling, Operation Birthday is officially underway, at a volume that made two members of the household staff visibly flinch and everyone else laugh. The day unfolded the way only a day built entirely out of Toby's ideas could unfold. Cake before lunch, which he defended as correct chronological priority. A round of karaoke that Sihuan participated in without a single second of resistance this time. And a treasure hunt that ended, mysteriously, with every single clue leading back to the same enormous, extremely real Ming vase Seoa had spent weeks specifically protecting. You didn't. I absolutely did. Happy birthday. The vase survived. Barely. You are going to give me a heart attack before I turn 9. You're already turning 9 and having a heart attack simultaneously. Statistically, so we're already past the worst of it. Games ran into the early evening, and somewhere in the middle of it, nobody could later agree exactly when. The whole tone of the party shifted without anyone announcing it, from birthday party into something closer to what the day had always secretly been for both of them. A quiet, complicated anniversary, finally being allowed to breathe out loud instead of held silently indoors. Everlyn found Sihuan near the edge of the room, watching his daughter laugh at something Toby had said, cake frosting on her chin that she hadn't noticed and clearly wouldn't have permitted herself to wear on any other day of her life. You're doing the thing again, Everlyn said softly. I know. How does it feel this time? Sihuan considered the question honestly, the way he'd learned to over these past weeks, instead of deflecting it the way he once would have. Like something that should have happened 8 years ago, he admitted, and like I'm grateful it's happening now instead of never. Both of those can be true at once. So I'm learning. And when the cake was finally cut, real cake, chosen by Seoa herself after a full, serious negotiation with Toby over flavor that had somehow taken longer than choosing the venue, the whole room gathered close, staff included, Everlyn's hand resting lightly on Toby's shoulder, and everyone sang, badly, loudly, off in at least 3 different keys at once. Seoa stood in the middle of it, surrounded by people who had, in a matter of weeks, rearranged the entire shape of her life, and felt something break open in her chest. Not painfully, not the way she'd always quietly feared this day might break her, but gently, like something long held too tightly finally being allowed to loosen. She looked at her father, who was watching her the way he hadn't allowed himself to watch her in 8 years. Openly, without flinching, without retreating somewhere else in his mind, the way this date had always sent him. Happy birthday, Seoa, he said, voice unsteady in a way she'd genuinely never heard from him before. She crossed the room without thinking about it, without scheduling it, without a single calculation behind the movement, and hugged him properly, arms all the way around him, the way she'd watched Toby hug his own mother a dozen times over the past weeks, and quietly, secretly envied. I love you, Dad, she said. No hesitation, no careful phrasing, no formal precision. Just the plain, simple truth of it, said the way an 8-year-old was supposed to be able to say it, without having to think first about whether it was permitted. Sihuan broke. Not loudly, not the way Toby broke things, but completely. His composure, his careful distance, 8 years of a grief he'd never let anyone see the shape of, all of it giving way at once, as he held his daughter and finally let himself cry in front of other people, in his own home, on the one day of the year he had spent nearly a decade trying to survive rather than live. Toby, watching this from a few feet away, did something that surprised even himself. He stayed quiet. No joke. No commentary. He simply walked over and stood beside them, close enough to be part of it without intruding on it, the way he always somehow knew exactly how to do. Everlyn watched all 3 of them from across the room, one hand pressed lightly to her own chest, and thought, not for the first time, that some families you're born into, and some you simply decide to build, one ridiculous, loud, healing afternoon at a time. Weeks later, the school gate looked exactly the same as it always had. Same worn patch of pavement by the fence. Same slightly crooked sign that said pickup zone. Same hour of the afternoon. Sun sitting low and gold over the parking lot. Everything else about the scene had changed completely. "I am older," Toby announced, for what was, by COA's count, the 412th time since the birth certificates had surfaced. "It's in writing, government writing. You cannot argue with government writing. 5 minutes is not seniority, Toby. It is a rounding error. Tell that to the 5 minutes. They happened. They're real minutes. I lived them. You spent them crying, by your own mother's account. Foundational crying, very important developmental crying. You weren't even born yet. You have no room to criticize my process." Evelyn, walking a few steps ahead with her sunglasses pushed up into her hair, didn't even turn around. He's going to lose this argument in about 4 more years, once she figures out sarcasm properly. "I give it until age 12. I can hear you plotting against me, Mum." "I'm not plotting. I'm forecasting." "That's the same thing with extra steps." Si Juan walked beside them, hands in his pockets. No suit jacket, sleeves rolled up in a way that would have looked, 3 months ago, almost unrecognizable on him. He was laughing, not the careful, extracted laugh Toby had once had to drag out of him with a karaoke microphone and sheer force of will, but something easier now, something that arrived on its own without needing to be cornered into existence. "She has a point about the rounding error," he said. "Mr. Cha, I expected loyalty from you. I adopted you." "You did. I'm allowed to disagree with family members. That's part of the arrangement, I believe." "Where does it say that?" "Nowhere. There's no paperwork. You told me that yourself, in the very beginning." Toby opened his mouth to argue this, found he'd been outmaneuvered with his own logic, and settled instead for a deeply wounded expression that fooled absolutely nobody, least of all Evelyn, who reached over without looking and stole the granola bar straight out of his hand. "Mom!" "That's the 3rd one this week." Was. He complained about it the entire rest of the walk to the car, exactly the way he always had. Exactly the way COA had once stood 3 feet from a gate and watched a stranger do, wondering what it might feel like to belong to something that loud. She knew now. She'd known for weeks. They reached the car, and COA, hair slightly loose from where it had come undone during recess, in a way she would never once have permitted a year ago, happened to glance back toward the gate. A small girl stood there, alone, hands folded neatly in front of her, the exact same way COA's had always folded, without her ever noticing she did it. Same watchful eyes, same careful stillness of a child who had learned, somewhere along the way, that stillness was safer than wanting things out loud. COA recognized the posture immediately, because she had spent 3 whole weeks living inside it herself, watching a family she didn't yet belong to, and aching quietly for something she hadn't had words for. She stopped walking. "Sewa?" Toby turned, following her gaze toward the gate, then looked back at her, something clicking into place behind his eyes. COA didn't answer him. She simply looked at the girl a moment longer, really looked, the way Evelyn had once looked at her, crouching to her level like the world owed her nothing except a little warmth, and felt something settle into place inside her chest, calm and certain. She smiled. Then she lifted her hand, small and steady, and waved the girl over. "Would you like to join us?" she called, her voice carrying easily across the lot, without a single trace of the careful formality she used to hide behind. The girl blinked, looked around, as though the question might be meant for someone standing behind her. "Me? Yes, you. We are quite loud and occasionally chaotic, and there is really only one rule." Seoa glanced sideways at Toby, who was already grinning, already delighted, already opening his mouth to deliver the line he'd clearly been waiting his whole life to hand off to someone else. "Don't set the house on fire," they said, together, at exactly the same time, and then looked at each other in mutual, delighted surprise that it had happened perfectly, without either of them planning it. The little girl at the gate hesitated only a moment longer before she took a small step forward, then another, crossing the distance the way Seoa once had, from watching quietly at the edge of something warm to finally walking into it. Evelyn, watching all of this over the roof of the car, met Si Juan's eyes and smiled the particular smile of someone who had seen exactly this kind of moment coming from a long way off. "Looks like the family's growing again," she said. "It does that a lot, apparently," Si-Hwan said. "I'm told there's no paperwork required. None whatsoever. Just someone willing to notice." He looked at his daughter, laughing, loose-haired, holding her hand out to a stranger the exact same way it had once been held out to her, and thought, not for the first time, that the quietest house in the city had somehow become the loudest, and that he would not trade a single second of the noise to get the silence back. The four of them, soon to be 5, walked together toward the car in the low gold light, arguing, laughing, stealing snacks that weren't theirs to steal, exactly the way a family was supposed to sound. If this story healed something in you, the way it healed this family, give it a like, drop a comment telling us your favorite moment, and subscribe. There's always room for one more at this table.